Hi, welcome to the breadboard. In this video we're going to look at upgrading my Ender 3. It's a V1. We're going to be upgrading its motherboard from the old 1.1.3 8-bit controller to the new Creality version 4.2.7 32-bit controller. Now, one of the reasons I'm doing this is because when it's operating, I can't do anything in the lab that requires quiet, like recording videos like this. Right now it's very quiet, but if I run the printer, it gets very, very noisy. And just to demonstrate that, let me just play you a little bit of video that I just recorded while the printer is running. So this is just a short clip from something I recorded a little while ago. So let me just play this, only a few seconds of it. As you can imagine, that is rather annoying. So what I want to do is upgrade it to put a controller in that has trinamic drivers that will quieten the stepper motors right down. It will also give me the option of adding a BL Touch if I want to in the future. And a lot more options as well, because the Creality 113 board has a 1280 microcontroller in from Atmel, well now Microchip, which has very limited amount of flash in it for putting programs in. I want to be able to run Marlin 2.x quite easily and be able to turn on a lot of things like auto bed leveling and some of the more advanced features for protection. And you can't do that with the old 8-bit controller card. So what I've done is I've basically taken my Ender 3 apart. You can see here right now it's opened up. The controller's already been pulled out. Now I did have a few static pictures I took, so let me just bring them up for you so you can see the process of taking out the board. This is the 3D printer, and as you can see there is the you got the bed. The controller is underneath the bed in a box section just here. So I'm going to just go through these pictures that I've taken. Slide the bed to the back. This is a bit closer as well. There's the corner of the bed. You've got 1, 2, 3 screws. They're Allen head screws that you've got to remove to be able to get into it. So here's the rear one. You have to bring the print bed forward to get to the rear one easily. A few turns and it's out. And then the front two here and here, I've just removed them here, so they're already out. You can see the Ender 3 collects quite a lot of printer guck over time. That's why a lot of people put a fan cover over this fan to stop it dropping inside. Anyway, haven't done that yet. So here's it opened up. Now this cable here running off to the side connects to the case fan to keep the controller cool when it's running, which is there. Here we've got connections for the stepper motors. You can see it's X, Y, Z, E. And if I bring up a board, I've got, here it is. And what we have is I've got this stepper motor here plugged into the X right now. This is the board that came out of the Ender 3. So we've got the X, Y, Z, and E. Down here we've got, move that up a little bit. We've got the fan connection. And then we have, sorry, is that fan? Yes, fan connection. And then we have X stop, Y stop, and Z stop. And then we've got head thermistor and bed thermistor. And then this is another fan connection here. So that's your main connections. Oh, aside from this one, which goes to the display. As you can see with the new 32-bit board, we have the exact same layout. The reason why I got the genuine one from Creality is because it is a direct drop-in for the old 8-bit controller board. Now, a lot of people have had issues upgrading Marlin and getting this working properly on the new 32-bit board. So I'm going to take you through the process of that once we've gone through installing this board and verifying that it works. So just unplug those. Taking pictures is always a good idea because you can see how things go back together. So this is the other end, and what we have here is we have our fan going to the case. We have this fan, which is running up to the hot end. We then have our X, Y, and Z end stops. Now these three cables are marked. And then we have two thermistor connections, one for the bed and one for the hot end. They are not marked, so you may want to mark them so you know where they go. Otherwise, you'll just have to swap them when you put it in and you figure out that you've got the wrong way around. The connections are all, or in mine, were glued in with some what commonly referred to as hot snot glue. So you may want to just be careful pulling the connectors out because you might pull the wires out of the pins instead of the connectors out of off the plugs. All right, so just be careful. If you do have the hot snot glue holding it on, it will peel off relatively easy. So just be aware of that. And here it is with the board now removed. Now there's two things I wanted to show, which, well, a few things. One is that a lot of these, obviously, they've got connectors on. The ones that don't, that go into screw terminals, they've just kind of shoved the wires in. These are the two from the hot end. They're just twisted and put in. Really, they should have ferrules on the connection so that they will go in and stay nice and tight. And I've zoomed in a little bit, and these are the two for the heated bed, and you can see they've been soldered, which is not a good idea. These will come loose over time, and I noted when I was disassembling it that the screws were not very tight on these. They may well have been when it left the factory, but solder is malleable, and so over time it's probably loosened up. These are the two power connectors going into the power connection of the board from the power supply, and those also are soldered, and they really shouldn't be. Worst case, you leave them unsoldered and put them in. Best case, you put a ferrule on them. So I'm probably going to put ferrules on these when I put it back together. So this is the new board that I've got, and I've already mentioned you've got all the exact same connections as the previous one. One of the nice things that you can do with this new board is you can update the firmware just by dropping an SD card into the slot, the SD slot here with the firmware written on it. We will go through that when we get to that. So we've got the two boards. Right now I have this board connected and powered up. I've just given it 24 volts. I've connected one stepper motor, and I don't have anything else in except for the display. So when you power these up, let me just turn it off for a moment. One of the downsides that you have when you're trying to run these on your bench like this is that you'll have problems trying to turn your stepper motor. I'd already pulled this out before I kind of checked which direction things went in, although I know that things were working correctly beforehand. So if you go in and you go to prepare and you want to move the axis, so let's just go 10 millimeter on X. You notice here that in order to conserve memory that you can't even have a Z axis move on here. So we move X. You can see I can move it that way. But if I try and go backwards, it's not moving. And the reason for that is because it hasn't been zeroed yet. You haven't done a home cycle. And the feature of move without homing is disabled. So what I need to do is trick it into thinking that I've homed it. The way to do that is, remember we said we've got fan, we've got end stop 1, X, Y, and Z. The order for homing is it will do X first, then Y, then Z on the motors. So I'm just going to pretend that the end stops are being hit. So I'll just go auto home, and then I will just short that one, done. Now short the Y, done. Now short the Z, done. And it should now come back on the display to there, and now it thinks it's at 0. So now if I go into move motor, just to verify things, move axis 10X, right? One direction. And now it'll go the other direction. Quite happily. It's a lot quieter on the bench because it doesn't have things connected to it. And there's no load on it. And there's also none of the resonance that you would get in the 3D printer from the frame and everything else. So anyway, that's just showing that the old board there, I've pulled it out. The thing to note is that when I go plus on the axis, it rotates clockwise. Now the X and the Y both rotate clockwise, and so does the Z. If you're doing an end of 5, your Z may go in the opposite direction. That's because the Z axis is connected differently. It's got a shaft right through it, I think, and it drives two belts and stuff like that. It's a little bit different than the way this works. So it's not direct drive, I guess would be the term. And so the motor direction is inverted. You cannot test the extruder motor unless you have a thermistor thinking that you've got the hot end heated up to the right temperature. I don't have that connected, so I'm not going to be able to test that right now, but it was working just fine before I pulled it out of the machine, so I know it's working. So some of the other things you see, in order to keep things minimal here, there's very little here. We've got Initialize the SD card, if you're putting it in for, with G-code on it for printing. You've got control, right? And you've got temperature, for example, to set the nozzle, the bed, or the fan speed. Motion, which we were just looking at. So these are, so you can set steps per millimeter and things like that. So note that 80, 80, 400, 93. You should write this down or use one of the G codes to extract it from the board before you put your new board in, so that if you need to tweak the settings, then you have the values to do so. Now, I ordered mine specifically for the Ender 3, so they should theoretically be already programmed. And as you can see here, there is very little menus. If I go into Prepare, Auto Home, Disable Steppers, Preheat ABS or PLA, Cool Down, and Move the Axis. That's all I've got. So let's go back to the info screen. I got an error min temp because I got no thermistors connected. All right, so there's how fewer things we've got right now connected to this. So let's unplug this board, power it down before you do so, and we'll connect the 32-bit board and verify things are all working before I put it back in the printer. One thing to be aware of is the connectors are turned 180 degrees around on here. That shouldn't affect anything, but it might mess your wiring up a little bit while you're trying to put things back in again. So let's just get the power connected. The plus goes on the inner connection. When you're connecting these wires, make sure you put them into the correct hole. When you look inside here, you'll find that if I screw this up, just going to screw it up and show you. If you look in here, you can see there's a gap underneath. There's actually a plate here that actually screws up. Now, if you get the board, it may already be screwed up, and this will actually fit underneath. You'll tighten it up, and it'll just be loose. All right, so you got to make sure you unscrew the connection all the way. You can see the hole opening up there now, so that you can put the cable in. These have got ferrules on. I'm just using a bench power supply here, and just tighten that down. So that's the same things now connected, and this does have an SD card in here because I was looking at things earlier, so let's just take that out. Okay, let's get this powered up and we'll see what we've got. So immediately comes up with the Ender 3 logo, and we've got Ender 3 ready. Now it's showing -14 on both temperatures, which because it's open circuit for the thermistors, which is not an issue because we're testing on the bench. And I guess the first thing to do is let's just see if our motor changes in the same direction. Oh, before we do that, you can already see that the menus have changed. This is because it's got a newer version of Marlin in. So under Prepare, you've got Move Axis, Set Home Offsets. That allows you to offset where the steppers are at 0 0 for the limit switches versus where the corner of the bed is, as an example. The usual preheats, moving access, homing, control. We've got the same things. We've got a filament menu been added here now. Store, restore, settings, etc. So not everything is in here that I want to see. Change it to say TF card rather than SD card. And the other menu that's now here is an about printer. Now if we go in here, it's saying it's running Marlin, which is fine, but it's saying it's running version 0.0.6. This is not the version of Marlin that's actually running. This is the version number that Creality have decided to put in here. Makes it a little bit confusing because I've seen on the forums a lot of people complaining, saying, oh, it's the wrong version of Marlin, blah, blah, blah. Well, it is version 2.0.1, I believe, that's in here. You can see the date of it is the 25th of the 4th, 2020. So it's, about 10 months old now. It's for the end of 3, and it's got extruders, and the baud rate is set to 115.2. This is one of the newer Marlin 2.0 features that is in here. Now, I'm going to want to put a even later version in, but for now, let's just see if... Actually, I'm going to do it during this video. We'll go prepare and we'll go move access. They've changed the order of things. Now you can see right away you've got all of them. If I try to move the extruder, it'll give me a warning that it's too cold because you need to be able to melt the plastic, otherwise you do damage to something. So we'll just go back and we'll move the X because that's where my motor is connected. We'll do the 10 again. Now I'll do the same thing. Now when I ran this before, you could hear the motor turning on the bench still. Oh, I could. I'll have to check on the video whether the camera picked it up. But here, I cannot hear this turning. I can see it turning. I cannot hear it. That's the benefit of the trinamic drivers that are underneath here. They are TMC 2225s, which I believe are almost identical to the TMC 2208s. So they're set to run in standalone mode. So the microcontroller in here cannot control current or anything like that. There's some little pots to set the current. These have all been set at the factory for the Ender 3. But if you wanted to tweak them, then you can do by adjusting these little pots. You can see the pots right here for adjusting the current sense. You would measure the voltage on the pot and you would tweak the pot. There's a little bit of math involved to figure out the right values, but that's what you got to do. Okay. The other thing these boards have is an actual BL Touch. Now, the first 3 pins, I'm going to mention this now, but I'll mention it again when we come to put in a BL Touch. You've got ground plus volts, which is usually 3.3 volts, and in, which is actually into the BL Touch, not into the board. That's the servo control, is the in button. And then you've got another ground, and then you've got out, which is out from the BL Touch, which is effectively the end stop that you would be using for the Z-axis, if that's what you're going to do, is use this for Z-axis end stops. You would need to download the right software to be able to use it, or compile your own. I'm going to end up compiling my own because I want the latest version of Marlin, which I think is 2.0.7 now. Alright, so we've shown motor working just hunky-dory. Let's go back to here, up to motion. You've got, so there's all these. Just go back to main. Go back to, think about printer here, it just has one thing in it. Yeah, it does. So that's the new board that's going to go into the printer. I'm not going to make you stand there and watch every last nut and bolt going back together to put it in. Literally the reverse of the way it comes out. And 4 screws. 1, 2, 3, and 4 to hold it in place. And just make sure there's no little phrase wires. If you don't choose to put ferrules on yours, then make sure the wires are not frayed and sticking out that cause problems. And just put them right back where they came from. As I said, it's identical to the one that came out, the 8-bit board. Okay. What else is there to say? Nothing else about that. So I'm going to do the upgrade on the bench here. The process is going to be exactly the same when it's in the printer, because it only involves using the TF card slot. All right, so you need an itty bitty TFT card, 8 gig or less. It needs to be formatted FAT32. Usually when you plug it into your printer, if the printer doesn't recognize that there's a card there, or if it does, because it'll see the card being inserted, but if it can't read, say, a G-code file off of the SD card, it's not going to work. Anyway, because it's the bootloader, it's very minimal firmware. At the point it does the upgrading, it needs to be formatted as FAT32. You can use one as small as, a few megabytes if you want to. That's not a problem. Anyway, I know that an 8 gig one works because I've already done it on other ones. So let me take you through how to update the firmware. Now, the firmware update we're going to do on this video is just going to be going to the very latest version that Creality is providing from their website. So I'm going to open the browser. So forums Creality official. So this is forums.creality 3dofficial.com. I'll provide the links anyway. You just need to search for Ender 3 firmware. You can put in the 4.2.7 if you want, but you probably still will find it. So the version that came with this is, where is it? This version right here, which is from August 2020. Actually, the one I have was even earlier than that. But it showed us as V0.0.6. I guess they compiled it way earlier. The one that comes with the board is the 0.0.6. Now make sure you get the right one. The board we have is the 4.2.7, not the 4.2.2. That's a very different board. So this is the one we've already got, so we don't want that one again. Now we've got a number of different types. You want to make sure you also get the correct one. All right, so this one has got a filament detector. We don't have a filament detector. These top three have BL touches. So we'll download the one with BL touch without the adapter board. And then the other one is the Marlin V2.01, and it's a V151 with a Z of 350 millimeters. All the TMC 2225s. So that's the only one really that is there that is a later version. So we'll download that. And then what we do is we will open up the zip file. Just bring it back on the right screen. And you'll find a folder with the inside it, and then there'll be a bin file inside of that. Okay. Now what you need to do is put the SD card into your computer. I'm just going to do that on mine right now. Give it a second to be detected. While it's detecting it, we'll copy this bin file. And if you look at what's on this current file, or SD card, should I say, we've got the older bin file, which was the V0.0.6, and an EEPROM.dat. The EEPROM.dat is a file that the older versions of software use to store parameters and things, because there was no, or at least the internal storage was not working very well. I don't think the newest ones use it, but we'll find out. Anyway, that's what that's for if you see that. And what you've got to do is you've got to delete everything off of the SD card. So we'll do that now. And if you check the properties, you should see that it is FAT32. If it isn't, reformat it to FAT32. Now, the next thing to do is take the file that we got from the zip that we just downloaded, drag it onto there, simple as that, and then we can just eject that. Okay, now it's ready to put back into the printer controller. So I'll go back to the overhead here. So I'll just power this off. You can plug the SD card in with it powered up. It doesn't matter. That's what you'd normally do during printing anyway. It just won't do anything. You can see it says card inserted, so it did detect it. But if I look at the card right now, see, it thinks I can print from it because it's the right format, but it won't see anything. There's nothing there because it doesn't recognize a bin file. So now what we're going to do is we're going to power off. Actually, I'm just going to take that out just for a second. I'm going to power on without the card in. All right, so it comes on pretty much instantly with the Ender 3 logo. I wanted to see the time for that because it will be different when I put in the downloaded software, because it'll need a few moments to flash it. Okay, let's power it up and see how long it takes. Go. So you can see no instant display. The backlight came on. It's taking a few seconds before the Ender 3 logo comes up. It will do shortly, hopefully. Yeah, so now it's finished programming. And we should get a different version of the Ender 3 software. The main panel looks the same. If we go to About Printer, we now have Marlin, and the version it says is 151, which of course that's not the Marlin version, that's the Ender 3 file version. Even though we've done this one, I'm going to show you one more quick update to show how you can quickly load in if you're going to add a BL Touch to your firmware. I am going to be doing a separate video where I'm going to compile the firmware myself, customize the menu, and a few other things probably. But what I have here is a clone BL Touch. I had this a while. I've actually bought genuine ones now because these are not as reliable or as accurate as the genuine deal. I just got this to experiment with. So we're going to connect this up, and I'm going to download the firmware that has a BL Touch. Actually, we've already done that. We've just got to put it in. So let's go back to the files, and we'll get rid of that one. And no adapter. So this is the one we want here. I will download it again. What the heck? So Marlin is 1.3.1 is what it will say, instead of 151, which I'm not sure why it's a lower version, but anyway. So we'll download that one. We'll open it up. Okay, it's not 1.1.3, it's .2. The .3 was with a daughter card on the board here. Sorry, let's go to the board. The .3 has a daughter card on this header for connecting the BL Touch. The 1.2 has a expectation of a connection directly to this. Okay. So if I just, actually let me just plug it in, I'll show you the actual file name. And there it is. Ender 3 Marlin 2.0.1 v 1.1.2 with BL Touch and the TMC2225.bin. Okay, so I've plugged in the SD card with the latest file on it. 1.1.2 is what it should say when it comes up. It says it supports a BL Touch, so we have one here, albeit a clone one, which is what I have spare. The rest are in my printers, the actual genuine ones. So we'll power it up. You should see a delay again because it's the only file on there, and it's a bin file. So we'll get the delay. You see the BL Touch doing its little power on thing. So we'll give this a moment to power up. There we go. Now, if we go to Info, right, 1.1.2, and it's also got an additional line saying bilinear leveling, which means it's got the additional stuff for automatic bed leveling using a BL Touch in this case. And if we go into Control, we will see a BL Touch menu and a bed leveling menu. So you would go into BL Touch. You can do things like self-test, which will just bring the probe in and out. Right, we go back and reset it. You can do a deploy, and you can do a stow. So that's your basic test of it working. We'll go configuration, go back to main. Now I don't know whether they've set this in the firmware to do still use the original Z end stop with this or not. We'll find out, I guess, when it comes time for me to put one of these in. But I'm not going to use this with this particular the initial install anyway. I'll add it afterwards. I want to just put this in, get it working, and then we'll look at upgrading with a custom version of the firmware, and I'll make it to rely on this for its Z height, for its end stop as well. Yeah, so that's pretty much everything I can show you right now. So I've shown you how to update the firmware, shown you how the board can be tested. I just unscrewed the screen off the side of the printer just so I could have it on the bench here. And now what I'm going to do is going to put this back in the printer, screw it all in, box it up again, and then power it up, see how it goes. So I'm not going to bore you with watching me screw the screws in and put the wires back in, but I will have a quick shot once we're done. Okay, so that's the printer back together. So I'm just going to do a quick home so you can hear how quiet it is, and that'll be it for this video. And that's pretty much it. So put a 2-bit controller in, no BL Touch, no extra fancy stuff. Now there's still a lot of things missing in that version of Marlin. I can't adjust the PID tuning, and I noticed when I did a quick temperature check, and the temperature for the nozzle, I set it to 100 degrees and it overshot to over 110 before it came back down and eventually settled down. So it definitely needs the PID tuning options enabled within Marlin, as well as probably quite a few other things. So that will be what we do in the next video, is look at compiling the latest version of Marlin for the Ender 3 and enabling a whole bunch of different options that we want to have in, like configuration, PID tuning, etc., etc. All right, so if you liked the video, give us a thumbs up. If you didn't, well then don't. But we'll see you in the next one.